Solitaire by Edwin Corle. Chapter 1. The Incident in the Streetcar. There were only two other people in the streetcar, both grown-ups. There wouldn't be any more now because it was too near the end of the line. 6 blocks to go. Rattlety, rattle, clink, clink. 5 blocks to go. Rattlety, rattle, clink, clink. It always made the same noise. It was a busy little streetcar going about its job with a serious rattlety, rattle, clink, clink, bobbing slightly and weaving slightly so that you swayed back and forth with it. Once it had done the last 12 blocks without anybody making it stop to get off or get on. But that was... What was that word, Miss Roberts? It doesn't make any material difference. Had used. Exceptional. That was it. 12 blocks without a stop. That was exceptional. It was a game to be played every day. Well, no, she only played it on the days she rode home from school, but that was 5 days out of 7, except the days Mother met her in the Pontiac. 5 out of 7 would be a majority, exceptional majority, rattlety, rattle, clink, clink. 12 blocks without a stop was a record day. This time it would be only 6, and then the end of the line. Now it was 4.5 blocks to go. 4 blocks to go, and then no. A stop. What for? She didn't want to get off. The conductor knew her, and she rode with him every day from school. And he knew that she always rode to the end of the line. And those two grown-ups, they didn't want to get off. Yet the streetcar was stopping. A weary, rattlety rattle ended with an abrupt clink. Larchmont Street. That was a funny place to stop. Larchmont, then Maple, then Sunbury, then Palm Drive, and that was the end of the line. Who could be so silly as to get on at Larchmont Street just to ride 4 blocks, and then get off again? She looked out the window. An old man was waiting beside the car as it came to a stop. He walked a few steps, past the window, toward the rear platform. You could tell by the way he walked that he was old. People were either young, like yourself, or they were grown-ups, or they were old people. He was probably very old, maybe as much as 50. Imagine being as old as that. It was hard to think about it. She might grow up and be 50 some day. A long time ago, about 9 months it was now, she had become 10, and that was exciting because that put 2 numbers in your age, when there had been only 1 before. There wasn't much difference between 8 and 9, but 10 was 10, and in 3 months the 0 would be changed to a 1, and she would be 11. There was still a long time to wait before she would be in her teens and really grown up. And as for 50, well, only old ladies were 50. She squirmed in her seat and looked toward the rear platform. The old man had grasped the rail and pulled himself on board. The conductor gave the bell 2 little rings, and up front the uninterested motorman heard the signal and started the car again. A long rasp became a rattle-ty-rattle. Maple next, 4 to go. It was nowhere near the record. Maybe tomorrow they'd do 13 without a stop. The old man walked unsteadily toward the front of the car. The rear half of the car had seats set in pairs facing forward. The front half of the car had seats facing center, so that you rode sideways. She always liked the seats in pairs. Then you could have a window to yourself, and you rode sitting forward. The 2 grown-ups didn't care, for they were 2 ladies, and they were sitting on the seats facing center. They had been sitting there a long time, ever since the car had been crowded, and probably they didn't care enough to move. They talked all the time, first one and then the other, but most of the time the rattle of the car kept you from hearing what they said, and when the car stopped they lowered their voices, and still you couldn't hear even if you wanted to. One of them had a hat with red cherries on it, and the other had a shopping bag full of groceries, which she held on the seat beside her. Once in a while she straightened it up to keep it from upsetting. The old man came along the aisle, grasping with his left hand the seats set in pairs. In order to brace himself, he walked on forward to the seats facing center, and he sat down almost opposite the 2 ladies. Funny-looking old man, he was poor. Poor people didn't live in this part of the city, so he must live somewhere else. His clothes were old and mussed and threadbare. The trousers didn't match the coat. His right arm was bent at the elbow, and the elbow was worn through, and he kept his right hand inside his shirt, as if he itched and were scratching himself all the time. It wasn't nice to scratch yourself, not in public anyway. The conductor came along the aisle and held out that funny little silver thing that you press a nickel into and it registers with a ping. If you just put the nickel in slowly, you can feel it grab the coin out of your hand and swallow it. Kaping, it goes, and your nickel goes too. The silver thing was being held in front of the old man, and the old man was fishing in his left-hand trouser pocket for his nickel. He seemed to have an awful time finding it, and he still kept his right arm against his body with his right hand inside his shirt. It must have been a giant mosquito if it itched that much, and itched all the time. She laughed, and then she stopped laughing at once. It wasn't nice to laugh at old people. You must always be kind to old people. You were supposed to feel sorry for them all the time and be helpful. That very afternoon, during the story half-hour, Miss Roberts had read the little Spanish fable about the parents who were cruel to the old grandfather because he was so old. He always spilled his soup at the table. The poor old grandfather had to eat all by himself in the kitchen. Then one day, the parents saw their little boy hard at work, carving a wooden bowl and a wooden spoon, and when they asked him why he was making them, he said, "When you're old and spill your soup, I'll make you eat out of this, the way you treat grandfather." And that taught them the lesson that everybody would be old some day, and that old people should not be treated unkindly. but should be given every courtesy, and after that they let grandfather eat at the table again, and he was careful and never spilled his soup. Of course, she didn't have a grandfather, and it was only a story anyway. But if she had a grandfather, she would look after him and be extra quiet when he was around, and never laugh at him. She sat erect and set her mouth in a straight line. Serious, respectful, that was the way you were supposed to be. But whenever you were that way, you always wanted to laugh all the more. Your insides laughed, and you giggled, and then you got frowned at, and you always choked the giggles back, and tried hard to think of something unpleasant, so you could feel sad and well-behaved. The conductor was getting impatient. He poked the silver thing closer to the old man's face. The old man leaned to one side in order to fish the easier in his pocket for his nickel, but he still kept his right hand inside his shirt. Maybe he didn't itch after all. Maybe something was wrong with that hand, shriveled up or cut off. Maybe. Ugh! No wonder he hid it. Now they were passing Maple. If he didn't get that nickel out soon, they'd be at the end of the line. Only Sudbury and Palm still to go. The conductor was angry now. You could tell it. He said something to the old man, and pointed to the slot in the silver thing, where you put the nickel in. Still, the old man was trying to find a nickel. Why didn't the conductor have more patience? You were always supposed to be patient when things didn't happen in a hurry, just the way you wanted them to. Impatient people were often selfish people. Miss Roberts had said that. Probably nobody had ever told the conductor that, or perhaps the old man didn't have any nickel, and was just pretending to search for one in order to get a free ride for a few blocks. Maybe he was so poor he didn't have even 5 cents. He certainly didn't look as if he had 5 cents. When people were old and poor, you always felt sorry for them, and you contributed to the community chest and took them turkeys and cranberry sauce on Thanksgiving Day. But if they came up the drive and around to the back door begging for money, Mother always told Celia that she hadn't anything to give today, and then Celia told them that Mother wasn't home, and they went away again. The old man had given up the pretense of fishing in his pocket. He looked at the conductor and seemed about to speak. Then he looked down at his right arm and quickly looked up at the conductor again. Something was wrong with that arm, all right. It must be what you call deformed. The conductor was frowning and saying something out of the corner of his mouth. The old man was shaking his head. No. The conductor was pointing to the front of the car, where it said exit. Not only was this old man an old man, but also he was poor, and he was deformed. All he wanted was a ride, and the conductor was telling him that he couldn't have a ride and that he had to get off. That was too bad. All this unhappiness was taking place over nothing but a nickel. It was a pity. It was a very, very great pity. But there was a way to fix it. If somebody put a nickel in the silver thing, that would satisfy the conductor, and the old man could have his ride. It was as easy as that. Funny she hadn't thought of it before. In her purse were 3 nickels. Altogether, they would buy 1 chocolate soda. But Mother would always give her another nickel if she wanted it, and Daddy would give her a quarter if she asked for one. So 1 of these nickels was going into the silver thing, and all this pity would be ended. She left her seat and went to the conductor. He had a hand under the old man's bad arm, and the old man didn't want him to touch it. But the silver thing with the slot was right there in the conductor's other hand, and without looking at the conductor or the old man, she slipped the nickel into the slot, and the silver thing went kaping, and the nickel was gone. Then she returned to her seat. The conductor was surprised, and the old man leaned back against the cane of the seat. The 2 grown-up ladies had seen the whole thing, and they spoke even above the rattle of the streetcar. "Why, what a remarkable child," said the one with the cherries on her hat, and the one with the groceries said, "What a good little girl." They looked at her and smiled, and the old man gave her a look too, but she looked out the window as the car slowed down to cross Sudbury Avenue. The conductor went back with the silver thing to the rear platform and called, "Sudbury." She continued to stare out the window in order to avoid looking at the old man, and cherries on the hat, and groceries, because she didn't want to be smiled at. You were always supposed to forget it as soon as you did something nice for poor people. You always acted as if you did it because it was the thing to do, the way Mother said to Daddy once at dinner. The community chest man was here today, and he's coming again tomorrow, and Daddy said, "Oh, that pest." But later Daddy gave the man $10, and it was never mentioned again. So she sat and looked out the window at 2 boys on bicycles on Sudbury Avenue. You could always go into that place where you were alone if you wanted to, and nobody can ever know what you're thinking when you're there. Nobody. Not Mother or Daddy or Celia or Miss Roberts or anybody, because you were all there, was to that place, and there wasn't room for anybody else there but you. It wasn't up, or it wasn't down, or it wasn't in, or it wasn't out. It just was. Oh, of course, you knew all about other people when you were there. You could see them, all right, but you couldn't know much about you if you didn't want them to. It was pretty nice, that place, where you were alone. The cars, rattle-ty-rattle, carried it on toward Palm Drive, and she couldn't see the boys on the bicycles any more. One of them had been riding no-handed. It must be hard to do that. Dangerous, too. Most boys could do it, though. After a few seconds, she turned her head and looked at the old man again. She wanted to see if he looked happy and grateful the way old people look in the life insurance advertisements and in the ads for Forest Lawn Cemetery. And he did, too, for he had turned partly toward her and was watching her, almost as if he were trying to say hello without quite opening his mouth. The 2 ladies were watching him too, and no wonder, because at last he had taken his right hand out of his shirt front, and it wasn't a crippled hand at all. He held both hands close together over his shirt front, and slowly he opened his shirt, just the least little bit. And then the funniest thing happened. A little sharp nose, a pair of beady black eyes, a little brown head with long side whiskers looked out from inside the old man's shirt front. It was the strangest thing she had ever seen. Inside his shirt, he had some little animal, a cute little black-eyed, bewhiskered something, too big for a mouse, and not big enough for a squirrel, and it had been there all the time, and that was why his hand had been there, and why he couldn't get his nickel out, and why he couldn't even explain. For 2 seconds the sharp face and the black eyes peered out from the old man's shirt, and she stared in amazement, and the old man smiled back with appreciation of her amazement. He looked down at the little animal within his shirt, and she smiled with delight, and all of a sudden they were both startled by a shriek, then another shriek, and a series of screams. Cherries on the hat was scrunching her feet up under her on the cane seat, screaming, "Oh, take it away, and Groceries, screaming too, ran forward in the car to the front platform and grabbed the astonished motorman by the arm and shrieked meaningless words at him and pointed back at the old man. The motorman stopped the car. The conductor came running forward. The old man seemed bewildered by all this sudden excitement, and certainly it was a surprise to her too. But Groceries was explaining to the motorman, and Cherries was talking fast to the conductor, and pointing at the old man's shirt, and all four of them seemed to be in a state of great concern. Words came so fast it was hard to tell who was saying what. In his shirt, live rat. Dirty old man, take it away. Don't let it out. Put him off. Do something about it. Call a policeman. Vile beast. Filthy thing. And a lot more words all mixed up together. The conductor grabbed the old man by the shoulder. "What do you mean, scaring these ladies? Where is it?" asked the motorman. "Put him off the car," said Groceries. "Don't let him come near me," said Cherries on the hat. "Where you hidin' it?" demanded the conductor. The old man was unable to say anything. He sat in terror, hunched up on the seat, his right hand inside his shirt. He looked from one to the other, and he trembled slightly. He acted as if he were afraid of being struck. "The little girl saw him," said Cherries on the hat. "The child saw it too," said Groceries. "He made her look at it." The conductor paid no attention to them. "You get off of this car," he said. He pulled the old man by his coat collar, and the ladies moved further away. The motorman said, "Put him off and give him his fare back." "He never paid no fare," said the conductor. "I knew he was a phony. The little girl paid it." "I'll get off," said the old man weakly. "Please let me off." "You're getting off all right," said the conductor, hustling him toward the front platform. "Try any of this stuff on my car again, and I'll have you arrested. Now get." The old man half fell off the 2 short steps. He walked to the curb without looking back. All the people in the car watched him. Then the motorman returned to his place, and the conductor walked down the aisle. "He ought to be reported," said Cherries. "Loony, I guess," said the conductor. Then he tried to laugh it off by grinning and saying, "We get a lot of queer ones." The motorman gave the bell 2 clangs, and the car moved forward with a rattle-tee-rattle, clink-clink. "Palm Drive," said the conductor automatically as he moved to the rear. During all of this confusion, she had sat in her seat. Things had happened so fast that it was impossible to do anything else. As the car moved on, she had a last glimpse of the old man. He was sitting down on the curb, and he had his hand inside his shirt, and he looked as if he were talking to himself. It seemed funny for people to make such a fuss over a cute little animal who lived in an old man's shirt front, but then grown-ups were so often excited about something that was commonplace, and not even interested in something that was ever so thrilling. They were just that way. You never could tell about them. The way Mother had conniption fits when she saw her balancing on one foot on the arroyo edge. But when they went to Boulder Dam, both Mother and Daddy wanted her to look over, and it was 10 times as far down to the bottom of the dam as it was from their garden on the arroyo top to the bottom of the arroyo. Grown-ups. And now a little thing like this old man and his pet. What was it? A rat, one of the ladies had said. Just for that, they had to throw him off the car. Now that didn't seem right, did it? She squirmed in her seat to look back, but the old man was hidden by a row of pepper trees. Anyway, the conductor hadn't really hurt him. The car came to the end of the line, and she got up to get off, and so did the 2 ladies. All 3 of them moved to the front platform, and she could hear that the ladies were still talking about it. "And such a shock for the child," Groceries was saying. "Such a little lady, too. What is your name, little girl?" asked Cherries on the hat. "Virginia," she said, and left the car with 2 jumps. "Virginia who?" asked Groceries, stepping off. "Virginia Stewart," she said. "Stewart, I wonder if I know your mother." "I don't know," said Virginia. "Do you live nearby?" "Just a block over there." "Oh, one of the houses on the arroyo," said Groceries. "Money people," she added to her friend. Said Cherries on the hat. "Now are you sure you're all right, little girl?" "Me? Why, certainly." "Then run along home now and try to forget what you saw in the street car," said Groceries. "And if you tell your mama and she wants to know more, then you can tell her. You say to call Miss Sims at 1807 Crestline Road," said Cherries. "Can you remember all that?" "Yes," said Virginia. "Then run along home," said Groceries. Virginia turned and ran 3 or 4 steps. Then she skipped a dozen steps more, and when she looked back, the ladies were walking in the opposite direction. The streetcar was ready to begin its return journey. The conductor had gotten out and reversed the pole. She heard the two clangs that meant go ahead. Then from the distance came the rattle-ty-rattle, and slowly it faded away. From the end of the streetcar line, it was one long block west on Palm Drive to Arroyo Drive, and her house was the one just across the drive on the corner of Arroyo and Palm. She skipped west, saying to herself, rattle-ty-rattle, clink-clink, rattle-ty-rattle, clink-clink, until an imaginary passenger was waiting beside a palm tree. She slowed down and stopped with an abrupt clink. She waited 2 seconds until the passenger was safely on. He was an old man with a basket of trained mice, and then she said, ting-ting, and started off again, slowly at first, but soon reaching a full skip, and sang in rhythm with the skip, rattle-ty-rattle, clink-clink, rattle-ty-rattle, clink-clink, and a basket of mice, so what do you think? It was going to be a record today, and nobody wanted to get off or get on as she skipped across Arroyo Drive toward her own home. But just as she reached the entrance to the private drive, where the white mailbox stood, the basket of trained mice fell open, and mice ran all over the car, and ladies screamed, and the car stopped short by the white mailbox, while the conductor threw the old man off. Then all the mice went running after him, and one of them, a white one, ran off with a cherry from a lady's hat. Then everybody sat down, and she said, ting-tang, and the car was about to start again. To the south, down Arroyo Drive, towards Sudbury, she saw a figure she recognized. She stood and watched, and the streetcar game lifted like a fog and was gone. It was the old man, a long block away, but coming up Arroyo Drive toward her house, slowly, steadily, and as he came on she could see that he kept his right hand inside his shirt front. She knew why. A sharp nose, and a pair of black eyes, and side whiskers. She stood behind the hedge that lined the property, and she watched the old man until he reached the intersection of Arroyo and Palm. He started across the street, catty-cornered, paused for a moment, while a laundry truck tooted and whizzed by, and then crossed over. He was coming closer all the time, and she peered over the hedge and held her breath. Arroyo Drive ran north and south, parallel to the Arroyo proper, on the west, and all of the cross streets ended when they intersected the drive. The west side of Arroyo Drive was dotted with houses which faced east, but the rears of which overlooked the arroyo. Between these houses were vacant lots, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 lots separating the developed properties. To the south of Virginia's house were several vacant lots, and across this area the old man walked towards the arroyo edge, peering over the top of the hedge which bounded her home. Virginia could follow his progress. She knew that it wasn't nice to stare at people, but it really didn't matter because there was nobody else around, and the old man didn't know he was being watched. At the back of the vacant lot, there was a steep trail, which led to the arroyo bottom. Nobody ever used it. Oh, boys sometimes, but hardly anybody, though it was a kind of trail all right, and you could walk from the arroyo edge to the bottom if you wanted to. And that's what the old man was doing. First his legs disappeared, and then his body, and then his head. As soon as he was out of sight, Virginia ran up the private road, toward the 2-story white house in which she had lived as long as she could remember. The hedge surrounded the property, except at the points where the private drive, making a half circle, came in and went out. Then there was a little road leading off the drive that went back to the garage, where the Cadillac and the Pontiac were kept. This road was also used by delivery trucks. The model grocery man, the laundry man, the White Swan dry cleaner, the bottled water man, all used the side road past the house in order to get to the back door. She skipped up the curved drive and on down the side road, because Celia was always in the kitchen in the late afternoon, and the back door would be open, whereas the front door was always locked. At the rear of the house there was a large grassy yard, containing a swing and a hammock, and the big practical playhouse that she had gotten last Christmas. It was a completely furnished playhouse, even 2 little lamps and curtains, and it had lights in it, so that you could light it up at night. It was just a few inches higher than her head, and sections of the walls could be taken off, so that the whole thing could be taken apart, and folded up, and packed in a large flat box. The first time she had seen it, way back last Christmas, it had been so lovely she had been afraid to touch it, and all Christmas Day, Mother and Daddy had gotten more fun out of it than she did. But later on, when she became used to it and understood how to play with it, the newness wore off, and she spent hours with it, cleaning it, sweeping it, entertaining in it, and dramatizing its daily existence. Beyond the playhouse was the flower garden, rose bushes, chrysanthemums, dahlias, asters, African daisies, a bed of cannas, and in one corner Celia's herb garden. There were little paths through the flower garden, and on one of them, near the roses, Adachi, the Japanese gardener, was kneeling and digging in the earth, sometimes with a trowel and sometimes with his hands. Beyond the flower garden was the hedge which went around the entire property, and beyond the hedge the arroyo cliff fell off precipitously, and there was nothing between the cliff at your feet and the golf club way over on the other side. She skipped past the playhouse and through the flower garden, on the path where Adachi was kneeling. He didn't hear her coming. "Hello, Adachi," she said. He looked up over his shoulder and bobbed his head up and down once. "Miss Virginia," he said, and went on digging with his hands and scraping with the trowel. She hurried on to the end of the garden. The hedge along the rear of the property was not as large as the hedge on the other 3 sides, partly because Adachi never gave it as much water, and partly because the soil at the arroyo edge was rocky and things didn't grow there so well. It wasn't quite 3 feet high, in contrast to the 4-foot hedge everywhere else. She stood at the hedge and peered down into the arroyo. The afternoon sun was over in the west, and all of the western half of the arroyo bottom was in the shade. She could step over the hedge by getting one leg over, straddling it, and then scrambling down on the other side. But Mother didn't like her to do that because it tore her clothes, and even worse than that, there was only about a yard of solid footing, and then the cliff went down steeply, and Mother was always afraid that she would fall over. Just to prove that she wouldn't fall over, she had hopped one time all along the outer edge on 1 foot and never slipped once, and that had been the time Mother had had conniption fits from the upstairs hall window, so she never did that again. Remembering Mother's fear, she refrained from scrambling over the hedge in order to get a better view below. She merely leaned over it, bending it back and crushing it against her stomach, not seeing Adachi stare and frown, because she was looking below. The old man had just reached the bottom, where the trail met the floor of the arroyo, and for a minute she could follow him. Then he disappeared into the chaparral and bushes that grew in the bottom, and she couldn't see him any more. From the bottom of the arroyo up to where she stood would be about as high as a 6-story house or 6-story office building, because whoever heard of a 6-story house? The arroyo had never been of any interest to her. It had always been there, 6 stories deep and a long way across, so that the golf club on the other side looked like a toy house. Once or twice, in the rainy season, there had been water in the bottom of the arroyo. A regular river once when there had been a cloudburst, and it had been interesting then, but today it was just the same old arroyo. She straightened up, and the crushed hedge snapped back into a semblance of its former shape. The copper sun was nearing the hills to the west. In half an hour it would be sinking behind the horizon of Flint Ridge. She stood in the copper light and put her right hand in the waist of her dress. Then she turned and walked back to Adachi. He was standing up and collecting his tools, a shovel, a hoe, and a trowel, because it was time for him to go home. "Bet you can't guess what I've got in my dress," she said. "Yes," he said. "What?" "Your hand." "Oh, sure, I've got my hand in there, but what else is in it?" Adachi put all his tools under one arm and said nothing. "Guess, Adachi." "Yes," he said, and walked away toward the garage, where stood his battered Model A Ford. She watched while he flung the tools inside the Ford. He was an awful stick, just a stick. He was always like that. A light snapped on in the kitchen, and she could see the brown-complexioned Celia moving about inside. Suddenly she dashed toward the kitchen, past the playhouse, up the 3 back steps, letting the screen door bang behind her because she only had her left hand with which to push it open, as her right was still inside her dress. "Celia," she shouted. "Celia, what do you think I've got inside my dress?" Celia looked up from shelling peas. "Fleas," she said. "No, no," Virginia danced up and down in glee. "Guess again, Celia, guess again." Celia guessed without looking. "Whole world with a fence around it." "No, no," shrieked Virginia. "I'll give you a hint. It's got whiskers." "Mickey Mouse," said Celia. "You almost got it. You almost got it, Celia. It's a live rat." Celia looked up quickly. "Huh," she grunted. "Claire, to goodness, if I didn't believe you for a minute. Now you go long and wash your hands." "Live rats, pooh, that all you got to think about." "I'm going to go tell Mother," said Virginia. "I bet she won't be able to guess, Celia." She ran out into the dining room. "Bet she's going to be right pleased, too," said Celia to the swinging door. Virginia ran through the house, but Mother wasn't in the dining room, or the living room, or the library. She went upstairs, taking 2 steps at a time, but Mother wasn't anywhere to be found. Then she remembered that this was Wednesday afternoon, and Mother always played bridge on Wednesday afternoons. She would be at Miss McLean's house, or Miss Blanchard's, or Miss Hilton's, or if it was the tournament, they'd all be at El Encanto Country Club, because they always had tournaments at the club. So there was nobody to explain to about the strange old man and the pet rat. Later she'd tell Mother and Daddy both, and they'd be surprised to hear such a story. She went to her own room. It was a large bright room at the rear of the house, overlooking the garden and the arroyo and the white letters on the distant hills that spelled Flint Ridge. Orange sunlight was pouring in the broad window, making it hard to see much because of the glare. Later, when the sun would sink behind Flint Ridge, she could stare out toward the arroyo. But her room wasn't a good vantage point, even from the balcony that ran along outside the French doors. Though you were higher than the garden, you couldn't see below into the arroyo bottom, as well as you could if you went to the back of the garden and leaned over the hedge. From the window, or even from the balcony outside the window, there was too much garden between you and the arroyo edge. He had gone down there, and he was probably down there now, in that brush, and the little rat was there too. Its fur must be nice and soft. Once she had found a dead bird, and the feathers on its breast were as soft as soft. She brought it home, but Mother had made her throw it away. It was buried out there in the garden. She knew the exact spot, even though it had been over a year ago. Worms eat dead things, they say. Ugh, worms were horrid things. "You worm," she said aloud. Turning from the window, she looked around her room. It was tidy. Celia had put everything away: books, pictures, the paints, the stamp album. The clock on her night table said 4:30. What did she want to do now? On the table near the head of her bed was the small radio Mother and Daddy had given her for her birthday. She loved having her own radio entirely separate from the big one downstairs in the library. It played when she wanted it to play, and it only played the things she liked, and as long as she didn't turn it on too loud, nobody cared how much she played it. Uncle Boojum and his family would be on at 5. They used to be awfully funny, but after Skidoo and Daisy invented the magic carpet, it hadn't been so good any more. But she might as well hear what Uncle Boojum and Daisy and Skidoo were up to anyway. Once she had sent 10 cents to the station for an Uncle Boojum button, and she had worn it for days. Where was that Uncle Boojum button now? She hadn't seen it for weeks. Could it be lost? "Boojum, Boojum," she said aloud. Then she whirled around and went to the bookcase. She knew what she had to do. The stamps. Standing on tiptoes, she reached the large stamp album, which Celia had put on top of the bookcase because it was too big to fit in the shelves like the regular books. There were half a dozen loose stamps in the front, which had to be pasted in their proper places, and every day she kept forgetting to do it. She carried the album across the room and plunked it down on her bed. Then she lay on her stomach, resting on her elbows, the album propped up by the pillows. There was a Green Republic Francais, 35 centimes, and another French one, 10 centimes, both of which she had salvaged from a letter Mother had received from Paris. The green one had a woman on it, who carried a bag in one hand, and was throwing seeds out of it, or something that looked like that anyway. And the blue 10 centime had a woman's head on it, kind of ugly. The best French stamp of all was the one with the big ocean liner on it. Normandy, it was called. She opened the album to France. Doing pretty well, France was, but of course the United States was the best. It was so much easier to get United States. Daddy said a man named Mr. Farley had nothing else to do but make a new stamp every time the president wrote a letter. Well, whether Daddy liked Mr. Farley or not, Mr. Farley certainly improved the United States colors and shapes. The National Park series was beautiful, and she had every one of them too. But then Daddy didn't like Mr. Farley because he was part of the administration, and Daddy was against the administration because it spent all the people's money and never balanced the budget and did even worse things, such as mixing government with business. There was something terrible about that, but she wasn't quite sure just what. Boojum. She mustn't forget to turn on Uncle Boojum. Balance the budget, Boojum. How do you suppose you balance a budget anyway? Not like balancing on one foot. You used arithmetic. Well, she really didn't like arithmetic very much. A boo and a jum to all arithmetic. There's where the green one went, and there's where the blue one went. Next, she had a red England that said 1D, and a reddish-brown England that said 1.5D. They were both alike, except for the color. The king was on them. They were duplicates of stamps already in the album, but they would be good to trade for something. Claire Inslee had a stamp album, almost as many stamps as she had. They must compare them again sometime soon. Funny the way people always got their heads on stamps. but hardly any stamps ever had animals' heads. A rat's head would be cute on a stamp, with little whiskers and black eyes. Ratonia, 1 centime. Red and black would be pretty, or red with a gold rat. That would be 5 centimes. There was a car in the drive. She got up and went to the window. It was James, Celia's nephew. He had driven the Cadillac out of the garage and stopped it. He always did that, so he could walk all around it and wipe it off. James didn't come every day, only on special days. Mother and Daddy were going somewhere tonight, and James would drive the car. They didn't have a chauffeur all the time, but James drove whenever they called him. She watched him dust the car for a few seconds, and then she went back to the stamps. The next one was a beauty, a 30 Helvetia. A handsome white building surrounded by blue trees and snow-covered blue mountains in the distance. Why do they call Switzerland Helvetia? By the time the Swiss stamp was in, it was 1 minute of 5, and she leaned over, half sliding off the bed, and snapped her radio on. In a few seconds, she could hear them talking about some kind of cereal, which was always a nuisance, but it never lasted long, and then Uncle Boojum would be on. The cereal was called Barley Brownies, and it seemed to be especially good for growing children. Moreover, Barley Brownies were high in vitamin B. Barley Brownies could be purchased from your nearest grocer. Barley Brownies cost but a few cents. Barley Brownies were good for your teeth. Barley Brownies were good for your bones. Barley Brownies made you grow. The American Medical Association recommended Barley Brownies. Hurry up with Uncle Boojum. Barley Brownies were sun-ripened. What does that mean? And each grain was a ray of sunshine. You could get a free sample by sending only 10 cents to the factory. But whatever you did, you must be sure to buy a box of Barley Brownies from your neighborhood grocer today. And just to be sure you didn't buy the wrong kind, the announcer said the name 3 times, and then spelled it. Then he said he was going straight off and eat a bowl of it, while Uncle Boojum, who had just eaten 2 big bowls of it, had another adventure story to tell to all the friends of Pa's Barley Brownies. Then came the chirpy little voice of Skidoo, who was a brownie, and presently Daisy joined him, and they got in an awful fix by landing the magic carpet in a barley field, and the farmer was angry because all his barley was going to the brownie factory, and it had to be perfect in order to go there. But Uncle Boojum, who apparently had fallen off the magic carpet yesterday, crawled out of a haystack and had a funny talk with the farmer, and each thought the other was talking about something else. Pretty soon the sheriff came along the road, and Uncle Boojum said all the wrong things, so that the sheriff thought he was a bank robber, and Skidoo and Daisy only made it worse, and then they all got arrested, and the sheriff took them off to jail, and horror of horrors, they forgot the magic carpet in the barley field, and just as they were being taken off to jail, the announcer cut in and said all the same things over again about how good barley brownies were, and she snapped the radio off. 5:15. If she had a pet rat, he would get barley brownies. He'd learn to eat them off a spoon, very likely. Why didn't Mother come home, so she could tell her all about the old man and the pet rat? Of course, she could go down and tell Celia again, or James. Was it worth it? No, guess not. She went downstairs anyway, half a mind to go out and talk to James, but instead she went into the living room and found the evening paper where Celia had left it. For 2 minutes she was absorbed by the funnies. Nothing else in the paper interested her, and she put it back just as it had been, because Daddy hated to read a paper that somebody else had torn apart. Through the living room window, she caught a flash of a blue coupe coming up the drive. It was Mother. Virginia skipped through the dining room, pushed through the swinging door, skipped through the kitchen and waited at the back door. James was being very polite to Mother. He was smiling and nodding and saying he would put the car away. Mother got out and came toward the kitchen door. She was coming in the back way, and she saw Virginia standing at the screen door, and they both smiled and laughed. Then Mother kissed her and patted her. "Mother, the funniest thing happened," said Virginia. "Look what I brought for you," said Mother. "The favors. Yes, you can eat the candies and keep the basket. You can put it on your dressing table and keep things in it. But don't eat the candies now. You'll spoil your dinner." Virginia was fascinated by the basket made of orange and blue paper, containing chocolates and assorted nuts. "Can I have one now? Just one, Mother." "No, you must save them after dinner. I want to talk to Celia now." They went into the kitchen, and while Mother talked to Celia for a minute, Virginia took all the candies and all the nuts out of the paper basket, and examined them separately, and classified them on the kitchen table. "What's in the funny, round kind?" Virginia asked. "Peppermint," said Mother, and went on talking to Celia about salad. In the basket, Virginia found a place card on which was printed El Encanto Country Club, and written in ink was Miss Edward R. Stewart. "I'm going to be Miss Edward R. Stewart, said Virginia. "Look, Celia, this is my card. Look, Mother, can this be a visiting card?" "Yes," said Mother, "you can put it in your pocketbook. Now don't get chocolate all over your fingers." There were 6 different kinds of candy, and 4 different kinds of nuts. And the chocolate did come off on your fingers. All right, just as Mother had warned. But you could lick your fingers, and that was all right, because it wasn't the same as eating a piece after dinner. Mother was leaving the kitchen. Virginia scooped all the candies and nuts into the basket. One chocolate fell on the floor, but that didn't matter. She rescued it and plunked it in with the others. Celia always kept the floor clean and ran out after Mother. In the streetcar, the funniest thing happened, called Virginia. "Guess, Mother, can you guess what it was?" But Mother was halfway upstairs. Virginia hurried after her. "Come, darling," Mother called. "I just have time to dress before dinner. You can help me. Do you want to do that?" "Yes, yes," said Virginia, going up the stairs, 2 and 3 at a time. "Where are you going tonight?" "The Newmans," said Mother. "You goin' to wear an evening dress?" "Yes." They went into Mother's room. "Which one?" "I don't know. The black lace, I think." "May I get it out, Mother?" "Yes, but first turn on the bath and put in a spoonful of bath salt. While Mother's bathing, you can get out the black lace." For almost an hour they had fun dressing. It was a procedure that fascinated Virginia. Many times she had helped Mother dress. There was nothing especially new about it. She could have told anybody exactly how to dress, what you did first, what you wore for a foundation, depending upon the kind of dress selected, and all about creams and powders and rouge and eyebrow pencils and hair. But new or old, there was always a sense of mystery about it. It portended great things. It was open sesame to a world Virginia had never known, a ritual preliminary to pomp and circumstance. It was the batted 15 minutes before a curtain rose on a performance, which was so extremely important that even the weight of an eyebrow pencil could make or break it. Sometimes Mother asked advice. This bracelet or that one. Earrings, this ring with these beads or 2 rings and no beads. Should the perfume be Cassandra or Christmas Night, or one of the odd ones like Mycen or Numero 5? Virginia made her decisions carefully, and sometimes Mother agreed with her, and sometimes she didn't. Tonight the perfume was Numero 5. She called it Cinq because it was spelled that way, but Mother always pronounced it Cinq. But whatever Mother wore, she was always beautiful, lovely, oh, simply perfect, always. Nobody could be as beautiful as Mother just before she went out with Daddy in the evening, even if she was as old as 37. Black lace, Numero 5, green jade, exceptional, said Virginia. Why, darling, do you think so? Aren't you nice to Mother? The concentration and the zest in this interlude temporarily eclipsed the interest in the unusual incident which had taken place in the street car. Old Man and Pet Rat were set aside. They were back in that place where you are alone. Daddy came home at 6:30. Mother was almost dressed, and Virginia went downstairs to kiss Daddy and talk to him. She gave him a peck on the cheek, and he said, "Been good today?" And she said, yes. He was reading the evening paper, and he threw out occasional sentences without looking up from the pages. Sentences which she had heard before, and which she could answer without thinking. How was school? All right. Did she play after school? Some. Did she have homework to do? Not tonight. Did she still like her teacher? Yes, the teacher was all right. There was a rattle as Daddy turned the paper inside out. He never cared what a mess he left it in. She sat still and looked at him as he read the market reports. He was big and tall, but not fat at all. He used glasses in order to read, but he never wore them at any other time. He wore a dark brown suit and heavy tan shoes. The way he sat, with one leg crossed over the other, you could see the edge of one garter holding up a sock. He had dark blue eyes, and people said her eyes were just like his, but her hair was different. His was sandy-colored and thin on the sides, while hers was light brown like Mother's. Then hers came down into braids, and his was cut short. Wouldn't he look funny in braids? Now he was saying, "What did you do after school today?" And she replied, "Came home." Then she remembered the rat. She caught her breath in order to burst out with this fantastic story, and then she paused. Would he like to hear about the old man and the rat? No, he wanted to read his paper. He always did the same thing when he came home. You were supposed to answer his questions, but if you tried to tell something interesting or asked questions yourself, he always said, kindly, but without even listening, "Daddy's reading now." Mother had been too busy to hear it, and Daddy wouldn't want to hear it at this time. She'd save the rat story and tell it at the table. She put her hand inside her dress. Right in there it lived. Just think of that. "Ratonia 1 centime," she said aloud. "What did you say?" asked Daddy without looking up. "I was thinking of something," Virginia said. "Speaking of symptoms reminds me," said Daddy, actually putting down the paper for a moment and coming to life. "I have a stamp for you." He fingered in a waistcoat pocket and brought out the stamp. "See if you can tell what country that is." "Indochine," she read. "That's right. French Indochina." "Where'd you get it, Daddy?" "A letter came into the bank today. One of our depositors, who is making a trip around the world. Daddy's reading now." That meant she could go. She took the stamp and went upstairs, 2 steps at a time, to her own room. She left the stamp on her album and skipped to Mother's room. Mother was seated at her dressing table. With a powder puff, she was adding the final touches. As soon as Virginia was in her teens, Mother was going to give her a compact, but that was a long way ahead, more than 2 whole years. It seemed a long time to wait, when she knew just how to use a compact now. But then none of the girls she knew had compacts or lipsticks, so maybe it was all right. Now that Mother had finished dressing, it might be time to tell her about the rat. She considered it, and she watched Mother. No, Mother wouldn't want to hear about the rat now. Mother was still thinking about herself. But Mother would let her put the powders and creams and brushes and perfumes away in their proper places. She could do that without even asking. It amounted to a game, and it was barely finished when Celia rang the chimes for dinner. "There, darling," said Mother. "We just got through in time. Let's go down to dinner, sweet." They went downstairs together, and Mother wouldn't let Daddy kiss her because she didn't want to be mussed up, and Daddy didn't seem to mind at all. They went in to dinner, and Celia served the soup. Mother and Daddy talked at dinner, But Virginia didn't pay much attention. She concentrated on the soup and had almost finished it when Mother told her not to eat so fast. But there was only 1 spoonful of soup left, so she swallowed that and then sat quietly while Mother and Daddy finished theirs. And for the first time during the dinner, she listened to their conversation. Daddy had just asked, "Are we dressing?" "Now you know Fred Mason will." "Yes, I suppose he will." Helen Newman said all the men were dressing. "Just because Fred Mason wears a black tie, I suppose I have to. After all, it's not so very much trouble, dear." "I dress," said Daddy, as Celia removed the soup plates. "It's in the stars I dress." "Well, really, dear," said Mother. Celia served the artichokes. Virginia loved them, especially when the sauce was hollandaise, and tonight it was. "Yum, yum," she said, but Mother and Daddy made no comment. There was a pause while Celia passed the roast, and after that the vegetables. Now was the time to tell them. Neither of them was talking. There was a silence that was made for the telling of the incident in the streetcar. Virginia looked at Mother and Daddy. Now they would listen, and they would be interested. It was on the tip of her tongue. The whole incident was reviewed in her mind in a flash. Every detail, from the time the old man got on the car until cherries and groceries screamed and the conductor put him off. It was all there, as clear as could be. She started to say, "The funniest thing happened," but she stopped, forming the words only in her mind. Mother sensed her reaction and looked at her and seemed to think she was choking. "Take a drink of water, dear," Mother said. "Had a letter from Spencer today," said Daddy, "from Saigon." "He's having quite a trip, isn't he?" Mother said. Daddy said. "Eat your artichoke, dear," Mother said, and Virginia pulled off the first leaf and dipped the meaty end of it in the hollandaise. The opportunity was gone. There was no way to recapture it. "I wonder if rats like artichokes," she said, as the story receded into limbo. But neither Mother nor Daddy seemed to think the query demanded an answer. "His wife despises traveling," Mother said. "Hope she suffers," Daddy said cheerfully. "Edward," Mother laughed. But Virginia was eating the artichoke and wasn't listening. She ate most of her meat and all of the peas and potatoes before she heard Mother and Daddy talking about something that caught her attention. "What's Virginia doing tonight?" Daddy asked. "Celia's in," said Mother. "Want to go to the movies, dear?" Daddy asked. "Yes," said Virginia. "No," said Mother. "Not tonight, dear." And to Daddy she added, "It's a gangster picture. I don't think she needs to see that." At the neighborhood, Daddy asked. "Yes," Mother said. "Maybe I'd like it," Virginia said. "I don't think so, dear," Mother said. "Celia can take you tomorrow when they are showing something else." "Okay," Virginia said. "And what did you promise Mother about that word?" "I said I wouldn't say okay. I forgot." "That's better," said Mother. "That's the girl," said Daddy. "Why do they call them artichokes?" asked Virginia. "Did anybody ever choke on one?" "You can't choke on an artichoke," said Daddy, "unless your name is Artie." Virginia went into peals of mirth over this. "Mr. Artichoke," she said, and she laughed again. She repeated it and clung to it, attempting to squeeze all the humor out of it long after Mother and Daddy had forgotten it and were talking about something else. When dessert was served, there was a silence again, and once more an opportunity to tell the story of the old man and the rat. But this time there was no temptation to tell it. She really didn't want to tell it. Mother and Daddy were never going to hear of the incident in the streetcar. That story, once so close to them, was now as remote as the mountains on the moon. Without any deliberate ratiocination, Virginia had changed her mind. The story was locked in a vise. No power could ever extract it, no matter how deep and long the present silence might be. The whole thing had taken root in that place where you are alone. It couldn't be told. It was a secret that she had experienced and appreciated. It was all hers. She drank her milk and put her hand inside the bosom of her dress and thought about the rat. Mother and Daddy had no idea of what she was thinking this minute. Even if they tried, they couldn't have guessed. There was something downright delicious about it, thrilling. She mumbled, but nobody paid any attention. As soon as dinner was over, Daddy went upstairs to dress. Mother said they must leave the house by 8, and James had the Cadillac at the front door and was waiting in it. That left a scant 25 minutes for Virginia to be with Mother, so they went upstairs together to Virginia's room to talk and play. There was all the opportunity in the world to explain about the old man and the rat, while Virginia and Mother played 3 games of Parcheesi. Virginia won the first game. I could tell, but I'm not going to, and Mother barely won the second game, even though one of her men was sent home, twice. I don't want to tell because it's a secret, and Virginia won the third game, which proved to be almost even. Nobody knows it but me in the place where I'm alone. And then Daddy came in, dressed in his tuxedo, and Mother asked to see if his tie was tied right. Mother fixed it, and then they were ready to go. Almost 8, Daddy said, and Mother went to her room to get her coat. "We haven't time to play a game now," Daddy said, "or I'd beat you." Celia came into Virginia's room, and Daddy said, "You and Celia can play a game." "I beat Celia every time," Virginia said. "Ain't it the truth?" Celia said. Mother came back with her fur coat, and Daddy held it while she put it on. Then Mother kissed her, and Daddy kissed her, and Mother told Celia not to forget that 9 o'clock was bedtime. They went downstairs, and the front door slammed, and the Cadillac purred for a second or two, and then the purr faded out as James drove the car down the drive. "What do you want to play, Celia?" "Ain't you got no homework to do?" asked Celia, relaxing in the rocking chair. "Not tonight. Let's work the jigsaw puzzle," said Virginia, dumping the pieces from their box to the table. But almost immediately she straightened up and shouted, "My candies!" Before Celia could gather the significance, Virginia ran to Mother's room, where she had left the paper basket Mother had brought her from El Encanto Country Club. She was back in a moment, her cheeks stuffed with chocolates. She had to swallow a few times before she could make Celia understand that she might have a piece too, but Celia wouldn't take any, and all she said by way of thanks was, "Don't you go eatin' all of them, or Miss Stewart'll be blamin' me." "Good, good," mumbled Virginia, rubbing most of her abdomen where she believed was the location of her stomach. The jigsaw puzzle occupied almost half an hour. Virginia assembled a number of the pieces, punctuating each successful union with a chocolate, and Celia managed to put together 2 or 3 pieces. The thing seemed to be a mill with a water wheel. It wasn't especially interesting after you worked it out, and there were quite a lot of pieces that just didn't seem to belong anywhere. "Let's stop it," said Virginia. "I don't like it very much." Celia was more than willing to stop. Virginia looked at Celia's bland brown face, and she wondered if Celia remembered. Probably she didn't, because Mother said Celia seldom remembered anything unless you told her 40 times. And it had been only once that she had told Celia about the rat. Even that hadn't been telling. She had only asked Celia to guess what she had inside her dress. "You don't remember much, do you?" asked Virginia. "Almost time for you to go to bed," said Celia. "I remember that." There followed the usual discussion, persuasion, admonishment, and argument, which had become routine every time Mother and Daddy were out, and it was Celia's duty to see Virginia into bed. To go to bed simply and matter-of-factly, when requested to do so by Celia, was something that one just didn't do, even though she knew that she was going to bed, and hardly thought of the familiar evasions and delays, even while speaking them. They were an incumbent gesture and had to be done. But it was a rote performance, for Virginia, while saying, "But that clock's fast, Celia," was thinking, "She doesn't remember anything about the rat." "Ain't fast," said Celia. "You get started, smack off. But I have to brush my teeth first. She doesn't know I said I had a rat inside my dress. Go brush 'em. We have to put the puzzle back in the box first. She wouldn't remember it unless I said it 40 times. I'll put this here puzzle away while you go to the bathroom. I don't know where my nightgown is. She's forgotten it, and so has Adashi by this time. Here it is. Now get your clothes off. I'm not a bit sleepy, Ratonia. You be asleep in 5 minutes. Oh, all right." She went through the preparations for bed, really anxious to be rid of Celia, but unable to make too great a change in the going-to-bed discussion. If it had been Mother, she would have gone to bed as a matter of course, and there would have been nothing to discuss about it. But with Celia, this kind of thing had to be done. By 5 minutes past 9, she was ready. "Good night and pleasant dreams," said Celia. She always said that. "Good night, Celia. Just wait till you get downstairs." Celia snapped off the light and left the room. Virginia could hear her moving down the steps. A dull light from the upstairs hall gradually made itself known to her eyes. The only sound was the rapid tick of the clock beside her bed. She relaxed in the cool sheets. After a minute or two, Celia would be safely in her room, off the kitchen, and upstairs anything could happen. She could turn on the light and read. or play the radio softly, but for the time being at least, she didn't neither of those things. She lay quietly in bed and reviewed the incident in the streetcar. It began all over again. The only difference was that she was all the people, not only herself, but the old man, and the conductor, and cherries, and groceries, and even the rat. She had small black eyes, and stiff side whiskers, and she was peering out between the sheets. Outside, all was darkness, and you could feel the space moving past you. You were rushing upward, or was it downward? Because this was the place where you were you, and nobody could touch it. Downward now, while a streetcar went rattle-tee-rattle, clink-clink. A rat was pulling the streetcar, a rat as big as a house. You weren't in the streetcar, and you weren't out of it either, but everything was everywhere, and when you and the streetcar hit the arroyo bottom, you had a nickel in your hand. You weren't frightened because the old man loved the rat. It had become little again, and you fed the rat the nickel. It sat on its hind legs, and ate it with its paws, and the nickel tasted like peppermint. You and the old man and the rat were skipping along under the pepper trees, and Fred Mason was dressing. He put on a suit, and then another suit on top of it, and then another suit on top of that, because he always dressed. Way in the distance you could see he was still dressing. Mr. Artichoke came along singing Hollandaise, his little fat body tottering on matchstick legs. "It's Indochina," he said, "Indochina." And you knew that it was you and the old man and the rat sailing away on the magic carpet to the land of the American Medical Association. Then everything began to come together, so that all things happened at once. Seeing the sharp little rat face with the black eyes and side whiskers, hearing the rattle-tee-rattle clink-clink, tasting the chocolate peppermint, touching the soft, smooth, sleek rat fur, smelling the numero cinq, all of it together until in the darkness the soft fur was Mother's fur coat, and the numero cinq came from Mother as she bent over you, and you explained to Mother what you had been wanting to tell her all day, that you fell down the rat hole to the arroyo bottom, and it was an adventure that had never happened before. Mother patted you and kissed you good night, and a vague form that was Daddy stood in the doorway. "She asleep?" Daddy asked. "She's all right," Mother said. "She was dreaming of Alice in Wonderland." And just as you were going to sleep, you knew that it wasn't Alice in Wonderland, but was something much better, because it really happened, and tomorrow, and tomorrow.